You ever wonder how the COVID vaccine got manufactured? Did you ever find it curious? Now, I'm going to stay away from the controversial subjects here of, whether you believe in vaccines or not. I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to talk about how experimentation works. I am Mr. E. This is Mysteries Mysteries, and we are going to talk about all things mysterious in the world of psychology. Some people view psychology as a pseudoscience or a fake science. But back in 1879, in the University of Leipzig, a psychologist by the name of Wilhelm Wundt actually created the first psychology lab. And from that day forward, psychology has been emphasizing research methods and experimentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about how certain drugs are passed and how they go through this strict regiment of experimentation. This is going to be great for any of you that are interested in the realms of science. If you're a psychology student, if you're a biology student, even if you need to help on figuring out what is wrong with your lawnmower, these are some of the things that we use to help us solve problems. So what it is we have this experimentation. And experimentation does something for us that no other research methods can do. And what that is they can create a cause and effect relationship. If you do this, then this is going to happen. But the only way you can create cause and effect is through experimentation. And I'm going to walk you through that. So let's say we have a medicine for migraines. This medicine for migraines is brand new. We want it to hit the market, but we want to make sure that it works. We can't just give it to a bunch of people that have migraine headaches and see if it works. That's not how experimentation operates. So what you do is you take, first off, a population. And let's say that population is anybody with any sorts of levels of migraine pain. Okay. From there, what you do is you create a sample. From creating a sample, what you're going to do is you are going to try to find a representative sample of the population. Representative sample of the population is a group of people that fit our mold of migraine headache sufferers. We are also going to try to find a random sampling. And what that means is we don't want to handpick our folks to be in the experiment. By doing that, we might impact our results. So we want to find a random sampling. So we get a random sampling of people. And what we do is we then have our group. From there, we have developed a hypothesis. And a hypothesis is going to be an if-then statement. If you take pain go away meds, then your migraine pain will decrease. That's our hypothesis, right? So we have our hypothesis, right? And now from our hypothesis, we can develop our independent and our dependent variable. Our independent variable is going to be the variable that we manipulate. So the one thing that we want to change in our experiment is we want one group of people to get the pain med, and we want another group of people to not. Okay, that's the one thing we want to manipulate. So the pain medication is the independent variable. Next, we want to create a dependent variable. The dependent variable is going to be the one thing that we measure. And as you can guess, in this case, what we're going to measure is how bad our individual's pain is after taking pain go away, our independent variable. Okay, so we have cause and effect relationship, we have hypothesis, we have independent variable, we have dependent variable, and then we have our sample size. We have our group of people that we're going to study. From there, what we're going to do is we're going to randomly assign our people, our sample size, into two groups, the experimental group and the control group. Okay. The experimental group is going to receive the pain go away medication. The control group is going to get what is called a placebo. And a placebo is going to be, in this case, it's going to be a sugar pill. Okay. It's going to be a sugar tablet. And then what happens is we take into account something called the placebo effect. If you are like Marshawn Lynch thinks that if he eats Skittles, he's going to play much better in football. I know I'm dating myself, but look it up. It's kind of funny. Um, but sometimes we think we're going to get better just because we think we're supposed to get better. So what placebo effect and placebo does is it helps us to take that into consideration. So when people join this group, one group will be in the experimental group getting the pain go away. One group will be in the control group getting the placebo. And if we do what is called a single blind experiment, these subjects won't know what group they're in. So they don't know if they're getting the pain med or if they're getting the placebo. Okay. And what that takes into account for then is the placebo effect. So if they feel better, we want to compare how much better are they feeling when they're on the pain med compared to when they're taking the placebo. Okay. So we have that all into place. We do our experiment, but before we do that, we have a couple things to think of. And now this is where we get into COVID vaccine. Again, I'm not going to talk about whether you should take the vaccine or not. That's not why I'm here. I'm here to give you opportunities to learn. I'm not telling you what to think. But what the pharmaceutical companies did is they did what is called a double-blind experiment. They brought in a third party that was not a part of the pharmaceutical company. So it might have been a group of people from a university that was near their facility. And that university actually ran the entire experiment. So the pharmaceutical, and this is what they actually did. The pharmaceutical company did not run the experiment. A third party did. And that's called a double blind. So the subjects don't know what group they're in, the experimental group or the control group, and the experimenters aren't assigning them to each group, and they're not handing out the medicine. They brought in a third party to do all of that. And what that gets rid of, what that eliminates is something called experimenter effect and experimenter bias. So experimenter effect would be something like this. If I know, and I'm going to exaggerate, if I know that the person has gotten the pain go away, I might ask them this question. So are you feeling a little bit better about those headaches? And just by that simple tone, they may start to be misinformed about how much better they feel. Okay. Or if they're getting the placebo, I might say something like this. How's the pain on those headaches doing? And I exaggerate, but any sort of slight change can impact that response and can impact that data. So you can imagine a pharmaceutical company really wants the COVID vaccine to work, right? But if they're involved with the dialogue and the conversation with the experimental group and control group, they can negatively impact their data, and that is really, really bad. And we'll get to that in a minute. There's also something called experimenter bias, which means you're going to look for things that's going to make your experiment seem that it works because you want it to work. And that's natural. So to eliminate experimenter bias, you bring in that third group. So they're observing and they're calculating all the data without having any sort of skin in the game. They are just collecting data. And so you eliminate those two major factors that can influence this data collection. Finally, and this is a very quick summation, but finally what you have is you have your conclusion. And in the case of the COVID vaccine, The big pharmaceutical company used another party, a different party, maybe from a different university, different researchers, to come in, and they actually did the analysis of the data. So they had brought in a third party to analyze the data and to write the conclusions. So it's really fascinating. The day that the COVID vaccine was completed and it was ready to be given to the Food and Drug Administration for approval, the CEO of the pharmaceutical company was on air, and he had said that he had just gotten this information 10 minutes earlier, and he went through this entire process about how they were not a part of the experiment that went into the COVID vaccine. The only thing they were a part of was creating the vaccine. So it was super, super fascinating. Now, experiments don't matter unless you can do one thing. We created a cause and effect relationship. We have learned that if you take pain go away meds for migraine headache, you have let's say a 70% chance of decreasing your headaches. If those that were on the placebo, they saw a 36% increase or decrease in pain. Yes, they experienced a little decrease in pain, but what we discovered is something called statistical significance. This was not by chance. This difference, the 35%, that difference of 35%, that is a significant difference. So we can say that our hypothesis is true, that if you take pain go away meds, then you will have a decrease in your pain headache. And we know that it's because of the medicine, not because of some other factor. Okay. There is one little piece that that I forgot, and I'm going to say this now. But when you have your experimental and your control group, you are going to randomly assign them into those two groups, into the experimental group and control group. You're not going to handpick who goes in the experimental group and who goes into the control group, just like you're not going to handpick who's in the experiment. And you're going to do that because that's going to help control all of the extraneous variables, all the confounding variables. Those are variables that can impact headache pain. So, what causes migraine headaches? Stress, sleep, nutrition, exercise, caffeine, glutamate levels, like all sorts of different things. But by randomly assigning them into these two groups, we just kind of balance out the two groups so that ultimately the cause and effect is there, that it's just the pain med that is the really truly only independent variable that we are manipulating. So that's a factor that must come into play when we are coming up with our conclusion. Now, once our experiment is all done and we have concluded that our experiment worked and that pain go away works, none of this matters unless the experiment can be replicated. And experiments can be replicated if you follow what are called operational definitions. Operational definitions is an entire list of everything that you've done in the experiment, including procedure, independent, dependent variable, experimental group, control group, et cetera, et cetera. You have to have your operational definitions in order, and your experiment has to be replicated, which means it has to be able to be done again, and it has to come up with similar conclusions. If that happens, then you have your COVID vaccine that can be passed out to individuals that believe that this is their best course of action in dealing with COVID. So in a nutshell, that is how experimentation works. That's how we get drugs passed through the FDA. That's how these groups practice really good science. And I think I'm going to do a couple podcasts in the future on when experimentation is not done well and how it can fool the public into thinking that certain things work for us when they really don't. So stay tuned to some of those. I hope you enjoy this. Again, I'm Mr. E with Mysteries Mysteries. Follow us on Spotify, on Apple, anywhere you can find podcasts, YouTube, Instagram, etc. A big thank you to our producer and director, Bear Wade with Unify Agency. See him if you are an influencer or you a podcaster that want to get some things done. Thanks for all your time. You have a great rest of your day. See ya.